Grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Our text tonight is Ruth chapter 1, and we will be reading down to only verse 12. Oh, I'm sorry, Ruth chapter 4, verses 1 to 12. I said Ruth 1 when I was looking at verse 1 of chapter 4. So, stuff happens in the head, right? I mean, you get things a little before the cart gets, the cart gets before the horse. That's what it is. All right, let's start over. Ruth chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. No sooner had Boaz gone up to the gate and sat down there than the next of kin, of whom Boaz had spoken, came passing by. So Boaz says, "Come over, friend, sit down here." And he went over and sat down. And then Boaz took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. He then said to the next of kin, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our kinsman, Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, so that I may know. For there is no one prior to you to redeem it, and I come after you." So he said, "I will redeem it." And then Boaz said, "The day you acquire the field from the hand of Naomi, you are also acquiring Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead man, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance." At this, the next of kin said, "I cannot redeem it for myself without damaging my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." Now, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one took off a sandal and gave it to the other. This was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the next of kin said to Boaz, "Acquire it for yourself," he took off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have acquired from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, to be my wife, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance, in order that the name of the dead may not be cut off from his kindred and from the gate of his native place. Today you are witnesses." Then all the people who were at the gate, along with the elders, said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you produce children in Ephrathah and bestow a name in Bethlehem. And through the children that the Lord will give you by this young woman, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." Wow, there's a lot going on there. Maybe we can think about it in kind of 3 steps. First of all, that first discussion between Boaz and the unnamed kinsman-redeemer. Notice he's never named, right? Which I think is an important thing to think about. In fact, when Boaz says, "Come over here, my friend," it's really not in Hebrew, "my friend." It's "come over here, you certain person." It's not. There's not that sense of affection or relationality. Now, there may have been affection. We don't know, but the word isn't there. It's just, "Hey, you no-name person, come over here," Because name is what's important, right? In this text, name's what's important. Whose name is going to receive this inheritance, whose name is going to be preserved in this inheritance. And the kinsman-redeemer, who has no name, is the one who decides not to preserve the name of his kinsman, of his relative. Right? But Boaz is named, and Boaz is going to have a name, right? As we'll see next week in the final section of Ruth. So the first part of it is, hey, I need to talk to you because you have first right of refusal. Right? Then the second part of it is he drops the other shoe on him, right? Because first of all, he just talks about land. Your relative has some land that Naomi needs to sell. And we'll talk more about land in just a moment. And when he thinks it's only land, he's all for it. But when Boaz says, now, it's not just land, it's also Ruth for the sake of inheritance, so that her husband's name and her father-in-law's name would be preserved. And then he says, no. When you talk about, why would that, what's the reasoning in that? What's going on with that? And then the last part of it is, the third section is this blessing on Boaz. That all the people, the city elders at the gate, all the people bless Boaz, bless his decision. So let's talk about that first part first. The first 5 or so verses, first 4 verses really. He says he will redeem the land. Now, one of the things we need to remember, and this is really important, is that land belonged to individuals only in a relative sense. In the first place, it belonged to God. God owned the land. Right? In the second place, the land belonged to the clan. We could talk about tribe or whatever, but the clan, kind of a lower step than the tribe, but it belonged to the clan, which, if you remember the year of Jubilee, what happens in the year of Jubilee to the land? Yeah, goes back to original owners, right? To the original clan, however large that clan is. Now, some families in a clan die out, like Elimelech here. His family heritage is about to die out. If Ruth doesn't have a baby, then Elimelech's name is erased. He has no inheritance. Right? So what happens to the land if it doesn't belong to Elimelech anymore? Well, it belongs to the clan. And that's why a kinsman-redeemer needs to redeem the land. The land needs to stay within the clan. Now, you can sell the land outside the clan if you have, say there's a famine, or you have a disaster in your family, and you need the money, you need to be able to survive, you need to lease the land or sell the land. I mean, there's all kinds of options there. But in the year of Jubilee, the land would come back to the clan. Yeah.
Have we heard anything about this land before?
No, this is the first time we're hearing about the land in the whole book. Very helpful. Yeah, this is the first time land has been mentioned. That there's a piece of land out there that nobody is doing anything with, right? I mean, we assume that when the family left Bethlehem, it was in the time of famine. Nobody's going to buy that land. So they just left it. And they went to Moab. And when they came back, that land still belongs to the family. Right? But when they came back, it hadn't been planted, so there's no harvest. It's not being used. So she can't come back to the land and have the fruit of the harvest, right? Because nobody's worked it. But now she needs to sell it to subsist. Right? It's probably part of Naomi's conniving mind, right? I mean, I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean, she is being wise as a serpent, right? To rope in a kinsman-redeemer, right? And land is a good way of roping somebody in, because you just can't get land any time you want, right? And land means greater prosperity, because the more you can produce, the more land you have, the more you can produce, right? So you could sell the land, but then it would come back to the clan ultimately. But the best option is to keep the land in the clan. Kinsman-redeemer. So it's understandable this no-name guy would say, sure, I have the resources, I can buy it. Bethlehem is prosperous again. We just had a harvest. Yes, I can buy this land. I can take care of that. I will honor my kinsman. But then Boaz drops the word, right? Says, well, it's not just land. Now, when you're looking at Levirate marriage in Leviticus 25, for example, in Deuteronomy 25, I think it is as well, it's about siblings that, say my brother and I, let's say my brother passes away, but his wife has no child from my brother, has no heir from my brother. Then I am obligated to marry her, give her a child, hopefully, right? And then that child would inherit my brother's estate. Right? That's how the Levirate marriage works. It's about siblings, but we don't have siblings here. Right? We have something different. We have related people, maybe distant cousins or something. Who knows what they are in the exact relationship. According to the letter of the law, there's nothing that requires them to act as kinsman-redeemer. So we might look at this, I mean, how do you look at this no-name person? Is he reneging on his obligations? Is he being selfish? Is he a bad guy in this story? I mean, a lot of times he's made out to be a bad guy. But think about what he's saying about, if I marry Ruth and she has a son, what does that mean to the land I'm just buying? Yeah, it's going to go to his family. I'm going to lose money on this deal, right? Because I'm going to buy that land. And then when I have a child with Ruth, the child is going to inherit that land. And I'm out, right? There's no benefit to me. I could lose wealth by this action. Or it may be, if I have to marry Ruth, Joanne's not going to like that. He already may be married, right? And he has to consider his family, since he has no obligation to marry Ruth, right? Because it's not a technical Levirate marriage. He has no obligation. See, in the Levirate marriage, if a brother refused to marry the widow, the brother's not punished, but he's shamed. It seems like I remember, I may not have this right, so check me out, that she can take off her sandal and beat him with it or something like that, as an act of shame. You should marry me, but you're not going to, so shame on you. Right? But there's no shame here, apparently, with this no-name. Maybe he has really good reasons for not marrying Ruth. We don't know what they are. I guess he could have bad reasons. I guess he could be a bad person, but we're not told he's bad. We're not told that he's to be shamed. They just may already have a lot of kids, you know. Who knows? We don't really know. But what we do, what we can see from the text is that that he's not shamed in the text. The text does not shame him for his decision. Right? Maybe we shouldn't either. And if we recognize that okay, no name is not being shamed, right? But Boaz is willing to go to great lengths to marry Ruth. What does that say about Boaz? He could have refused too, right? But he doesn't refuse. It says something, and remember, I had to go back to chapters 2 and 3, talk about the chesed of Boaz. Boaz has this chesed. He's this person of character, person of worth, who is willing to go beyond what is required, to do what he's not required to do. And I think that's the story here. And the reason Boaz is praised and the no-name guy is not shamed is because what he is doing is a gospel act. It's a gracious act. He's acting out of grace. It's not so much romance. It's not like Boaz is goo-goo-eye, you know, with Ruth or something, you know. Is that a phrase? Goo-goo-eye? I mean, what is that? I don't remember what it is. It may not be the right phrase. You know, I know how I feel. I just don't know how to describe it, right? You know, when I'm looking at Jennifer, right? I mean, that's what it is. So I don't know if I don't think there's necessarily any romantic thing going on here. It's possible that it is. We're just not told. I think it's a chesed thing that's going on here. It's this loving kindness. It's this steadfast love. It's this loyal commitment that Boaz has toward Naomi and her family, Naomi and Ruth. Right? I think that's one of the reasons that this other kinsman is not named. He's not named. I think that indicates he's not shamed. He's not named because the name of Boaz is being exalted. He's not named because it's not his name that is remembered. It's Boaz that's remembered. Right? Because of Boaz's great chesed. And remember that Boaz's chesed is a response, in part, to Ruth's chesed toward Naomi. Right? Remember that little conversation or blessing that Boaz gave in chapter 2? You have shown chesed to your mother-in-law. And therefore, may God give you more, not less. Right? And so Boaz is now the instrument of God in showing grace to Ruth in response to the grace that she showed to Naomi. Right? Yeah.
Talk about shame and stuff like that. There's a tribe up in Alaska to make totem poles.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody shames the tribe, they'll make a totem pole and they just point right at the people. They call it the shaming pole.
The shaming pole. Yeah.
Shaming.
Well, honor and shame cultures, I mean, are very common. And Israel participated in that honor shame culture. Yeah. I don't see the shaming here, though, of this no name. Possible, but I don't particularly see it. I think it's more about Boaz. Boaz says, I will redeem it. Now, what this also tells us, whatever reason the no name had for not marrying Ruth, and we might suppose he had some good reasons, family, inheritance, dividing his wealth, you know, whatever it may have been. whatever good reasons he had for not marrying Ruth, Boaz could have had the same good reasons for not marrying Ruth. But instead, Hesed. Instead, he's willing to enter into a marriage that may divide his own inheritance. He's willing to do what the others want. And in fact, he intends, by marrying Ruth, we don't know if he's married somebody else. Remember, in these sorts of kinsman-redeemer relationships, you could have two wives, possibly three. You could. We just don't know. We don't know about Boaz. We're not told. But he could have had similar reasons that the no-name had. But this is where Chesed, going above the obligation, or going beyond the expectation. It's like when Jesus says, don't just go 1 mile with them, go 2 miles with them. I think Boaz is exhibiting that character. Now, he may be in love with Ruth too. Who knows? We don't know. We don't know anything about the romance.
We do know that it was a sudden thing for no name. Boaz had a history.
Yeah, a history with Ruth, right? Yeah. So no name, this gets thrown on him in one morning, right? Oh, land? Yeah, I need land. I'll buy the land. Wife? No thanks. I don't need a wife for whatever reason.
I think it's all part of God's plan.
Yeah, I mean, even the language, and this is part of the subtleties of our narrative, is that no sooner had Boaz gone up to the gate and sat down than the next of kin of whom Boaz has spoken, came passing by. It's that language of passing by. As it happened, Ruth showed up in Boaz's field. As it happened, the morning that Boaz wants to deal with this and take care of it, which is the next morning after the threshing floor, he wants to make sure we get this done. Here he comes. So I think that's part of the hidden footprints here of the divine work. God is never named as a subject doing, never identified as a subject doing something in the narrative. It's part of blessings and that sort of thing, but never named as an action, as an agent of action. But clearly the narrative is assuming God is at work in these connections. Yeah. Well, let's go down to verse 7 then, where they make this exchange. Cultures have weird stuff with feet, I had a guest who was German in my home for a couple of days about a month ago. He was here for a conference, and he was the youth pastor at a church where one of my former students is the pastor in Germany, and asked if he could stay with us, and said, "Yeah, sure." Yeah. He walks into the house and said, "You don't have to take off your shoes." We don't do that here. You don't have to do that. I get up next morning, where all his shoes are? They're at the door. They're just customs about wearing shoes, not wearing shoes, what you do with those shoes. You remember you probably remember stories about how people would throw shoes at other people in the Middle East as an insult. As a way of insulting somebody, you throw your shoe at them. So cultures have all kinds, and when the woman is refused marriage by the kinsman-redeemer in Leviticus, she takes off her shoe and shames him with it. So there's all sorts of things you do with shoes, right? In a lot of cultures, you take off your shoes when you go in the house because you don't want to track all that dirt from the outside into your house, right? I mean, in Japan, Singapore, you take off your shoes. So what's going on here? He hands the sandal. There's some theories about this. Nobody, I don't think, really knows for sure. But there is this notion, like in Psalm 60, where God says, I will put my foot on the land of Edom. Now, when God puts God's foot on the land of Edom, it's a way of saying ownership. It's a way of saying, I'm here. This is mine. Right? Going to do that in Philistia. It's going to do that in Edom. If we know from ancient texts, there's a whole set of texts called the Nuzi text, which are kind of contain, let me put it that way, they contain cultural descriptions of practices in the ancient Near East before or kind of contemporary with Abraham. Comes from that about 1800 BC, somewhere around there. And so cultural practices of not Israel, this isn't from Israel, this is from other lands. For example, using your maidservant to produce an heir, that's part of that. Levirate marriage is a part of it. So what we read in Israel is not unique in the ancient Near East. Not everything. And we know that that one of the practices in Nuzi, these Nuzi texts, is that when you buy and sell land, one of the practices was that you would go out to the land and the seller would lift up your foot and put your foot on his land. So that your foot is on the land symbolizes you now own it. All right. Some think that this taking off the sandal and handing it to him, when you're not at the land, you didn't go a couple miles out to the land to do this, you're at the gate. So you take the sandal off and say, it's yours. As a symbolic act, as a public, concrete act, as a way of signing a contract, you might say, because of the witnesses that are there. All the people are witnessing this. So it's a public transaction. That's probably the way to understand this shoe thing. But nobody can be absolutely certain about that. It's a transfer of ownership. For him to take his shoe off and hand it over, transfer of ownership. Clearly, that's what it intends. But why would handing a sandal do that? Maybe because of this cultural backdrop where putting your foot on the land is to actually take possession of the land. Right? Hey, but whatever the cultural backdrop is, there's clearly a transaction here that maybe didn't always survive. Because you notice the text says this was the custom in former times, which tells us that Ruth is not written at the same time this happens. Right? It's not like Ruth wrote this or Boaz wrote this. This is written by someone who's a little further away, time-wise, to say, that's the way they used to do it back then. As if we don't do it that way anymore. This is, maybe we could just say back in the day. Right? Back in the day, this is how we did that. So we don't know how long after the events of Ruth that it's written down. Some say it was hundreds of years later that it was written down. We just don't know. Nothing tells us. We know it's at least after the reign of David, right? Because David gets mentioned at the end. So we know it's some number of years at least. And you think about 80, 90, 100 years, customs can change pretty radically over that time.
Make an assumption on that hand shears too.
Yeah.
They wore sandals over there, don't you know, it had a lot of dirt on it? And when you handed him that sandal, There was dirt in there from this land.
Well, or dirt from the gate as well, dirt from the land, but land. I mean, it's dirt, right? So yeah, that can factor into it. Maybe that's why it's a shoe. Yeah, it's a sandal. It's something you're walking on the land with. Symbolizes the transference of land. Yeah. So let's go down to verses 11. Well, Boaz makes this statement about, okay, this inheritance is mine. I'm going to marry Ruth. But notice his intent. His intent is not about self-acquisition. It's not about what he acquires for his own inheritance or for his own house or for his own prosperity. It's for Ruth and her mother. It's for their husbands, to give honor to their husbands so that they will not be cut off, so that that inheritance would not be cut off, so that their name would not be forgotten. Right? Unlike the no-name guy, he's already forgotten because we don't even get his name, right? So I think you have to see in that the chesed as well. So I'm doing this not so I can build up my own house. I'm doing this so that their house, the house of Naomi and Ruth and their husbands, may have a voice or may have a place, an inheritance in the land. So let's go down to verses. This is where we can conclude in a few moments here, verses 11 and 12. 3 blessings. And I think it's important to notice the difference between these blessings. If you look at it, it's may. What's the first one? May what? May what happen? Verse 11. May the Lord. Okay. Yeah, so what's the big deal about Rachel and Leah? Yeah. Be like Rachel and Leah. Who are Rachel and Leah? Well, you got to know your stories, right? Yeah, they're the mothers of Israel, along with their maidservants, right? But they're the mothers of Israel. I mean, this is the origin of Israel, the 12 sons of Jacob, right? Rachel and Leah. So it's a blessing that the house of Boaz through Ruth make this woman, Ruth, not your other wife or whatever else you might have, but Ruth, this woman, may she be like a Rachel and a Leah. Now, remember, Ruth is barren at this point. 10 years, presumably 10 years married. We don't know that exactly. But she comes out of Moab with no children. And so it's a blessing on Ruth that she would be as fruitful as Rachel and Leah, who produced the 12 sons of Jacob. Right? Remember, we're talking about a Moabite woman, right, who would become like Rachel and Leah. Remember, Rachel is Jacob's favorite, right? Buried. Where's Rachel buried? Near Bethlehem. Right? It's pretty close to Bethlehem. Kind of between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, but it's closer to Bethlehem. Yeah. So that blessing, you can't get a more historical, deeply embedded in the story of Israel sort of blessing, Rachel and Leah. All right. What's the next blessing? May you produce children in Ephrathah and bestow a name in Bethlehem. A name in Bethlehem. Yeah. That this region. So okay, Rachel and Leah gives us this picture of all 12 sons, right? 12 tribes, whatever. Now we're getting particular. We're getting down to the clan. in the city of Bethlehem. That there's going to be a name. Now, there's a big debate about bestow a name. What is he talking about? Is it the name of Boaz? Is it the name of David? Is it, what name are we talking about there? Whatever it is, it's related to Judah and Bethlehem. To Judah, the clan of Ephrathah, and Bethlehem, which means we're getting it narrowed down here. It is a blessing on a clan in Judah near Bethlehem, which probably sets us up for the next section, talking about David as one of the descendants of Ruth and Boaz. Right? The third blessing, what is that one? Verse 12. Yeah, like to have a house, to have children, have a house, like who? Perez. All right. Well, you got to know your stories. Israel knew their story. Right? Who's Perez? Other than first baseman of Cincinnati Reds in the 1970s. All right, you know what I'm saying? All right. Perez is the son of Tamar, who was born to Judah. Why is Tamar getting the name here? I mean, who cares who Tamar is? Why would just don't be like the house of Perez? Be like the house of Judah. Why name Tamar or Tamar, however you want to say it? That's a good Mississippi way of saying it, Tamar. Okay, all right. I can say that because I lived in Mississippi 2 years. And I learned things like that. Good friends still there. I need to cut that out of this probably. Anyway, so Tamar. Who's Tamar? She's what? No, that's a Tamar. That's a Tamar that, later in David's story. This is earlier. Right?
Judah's daughter-in-law.
Judah's daughter-in-law.
That husband died, and he did not honor his brother.
Right. The brother did not honor the task of giving her a child. Right. And they both died. The first son was not a good man. He died. Second son doesn't honor the levirate marriage, doesn't give a child. In fact, he has sex with her, but he doesn't consummate. Right? And he dies. Now, Tamar, you have to remember, is she an Israelite? She's not. She's a Canaanite. And then she dresses up like a prostitute, right? And then seduces Judah and has twins from that seduction. I mean, this is scandalous, right? Be like the house of Perez, the son of an incestuous prostitute relationship. Whoa. I think some people might ban that book from the library, maybe. I don't know. Goodness. And we're going to put it in a blessing? In other words, Israel recognizes the work of God in the midst of all that. And all that hurt, pain, woundedness, sin, God worked through it. And it had to be, remember Judah is ultimately reveals herself to Judah. Right? And Judah, you can say this for Judah owns up to it. Right? and recognizes his role and his responsibility. Right? But here Tamar is mentioned. She's a Canaanite. This is, I think the reason Tamar is mentioned has to do with the fact that that constant refrain we get in the book, Ruth the Moabitess, Ruth the Moabitess, Ruth the Moabitess. And in the blessing, the city itself recognizes, hey, Tamar's part of our story. It's part of Judah. It's part of Bethlehem. And a Canaanite is part of our story, part of our lineage. We all descended from Tamar, maybe, but Judah descended from Tamar. I mean, not Judah, but Perez descended from Tamar. So it's a sort of acceptance of Ruth, right? The blessing is the town's acceptance of Ruth. That we're going to include Ruth. Ruth is not going to be excluded because she's a Moabite. She's going to be included. And may God bless Ruth and Boaz with a heritage like Perez. That's just scandalous in so many ways. It's shocking to our sensibilities, which means maybe we need a little revision of our sensibilities in this context. So 3 blessings that basically say to Boaz, we're with you. And it's all getting narrowed down, you see. It narrows it down. We get Israel as a whole. We get Judah. And then we get a specific genealogy, right? Perez. Those blessings. I can remember the day when a teenager could have a child out of wedlock and the church would shame her. It seems to me that we welcome children. We welcome children. And here is at this point in Ruth, there's this hope for children. There's this hope for the house of Naomi and Ruth and Boaz, and a blessing, the sort of blessing that should come out of our own mouths when we see this sort of chesed. Boaz showing loyalty and steadfast love and everlasting kindness toward Ruth, just as Ruth had showed it to Naomi. And when we see that story, we pause, and in public and in the city gate with all the elders, we say, Lord, bless them. Lord, bless them. And that's where our story is at the moment. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with us all. Amen.